ABC News Special Report. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good afternoon. We're coming on the air at this hour because President Biden is about to sign the landmark bipartisan bill protecting same-sex and interracial marriages. This historic Respect for Marriage Act requires the federal government to recognize those marriages. The elaborate ceremony is being held on the South Lawn with a list of invited speakers and performers. Thousands of guests have been invited, including survivors of the Pulse nightclub shooting in Florida and most recently the Club Q attack in Colorado. The president is joined at the White House by members of both parties. We do know that 12 Republican senators and 39 Republicans in the House all sided with Democrats to pass this bill. This is also one of the final bills to pass under House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's leadership. She became emotional when she announced its passage, saying she was, quote, overjoyed for this to be one of her last acts. The bill became a top priority following the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade, which had guaranteed a constitutional right to abortion. In his concurring opinion on Roe, Justice Clarence Thomas called on the court to reconsider several marriage-related precedents, including the 2015 ruling. That decision guaranteed across this country that all states must perform same-sex marriages. The polling in this country shows more than 70% of Americans support same-sex marriage. We know at the White House right now, Vice President Kamala Harris introducing President Biden to speak on this day of history. Let's listen to the president as he approaches the podium.
Hello, hello, hello. Today's a good day. A day America takes a vital step toward equality, toward liberty and justice. Not just for some, but for everyone. Everyone. Toward creating a nation where decency, dignity, and love are recognized, honored, and protected. Today, I sign the Respect for Marriage Act into law. Deciding whether to marry, who to marry, is one of the most profound decisions a person can make. And as I've said before, and some of you might remember, on a certain TV show 10 years ago, I got in trouble. Marriage, I mean this with all my heart, marriage is a simple proposition. Who do you love? And will you be loyal to that person you love? It's not more complicated than that. And the law recognizes that everyone should have the right to answer those questions for themselves without the government interference. It also secures the federal rights, protections that come with marriage. Like when your loved one gets sick and you've legally recognized as a next of kin. For most of our nation's history, we denied interracial couples and same-sex couples from these protections. We failed to treat them with equal dignity and respect. And now, the law requires that interracial marriage and same-sex marriage must be recognized as legal in every state in the nation. I want to thank all of you for being here today, for being part of this important movement. Jill, Kamala, Doug, my cabinet members, including Pete Buttigieg. And a special thanks to our performers, Joy, Sam, and Cindy. Look, you know, and the Gay Men's Choir of Washington, D.C., Gay Men's Marriage Choir, and the members of Congress here today, and the Senate. This bipartisan vote simply would not have happened without the leadership and persistence of a real hero, Tammy Baldwin, Senator Tammy Baldwin. And thank you, Susan Collins, who did not rest until this bill got done. And the leader, Schumer, Senators Portman, Sinema, Tillis, Feinstein, Booker. And in the House, this would not have happened, as much wouldn't happen without Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker. Equality and dignity for the LGBT community has always been her North Star. From her first speech on the House floor pledging to end AIDS and signaling the bill and signing the bill today. All that time span. Madam Speaker, on behalf of all Americans, thank you for this and so much more for your decades of service. We also owe our special thanks to representatives like Jerry Nadler, who first introduced the Respect for Marriage Act a decade ago, David Cicilline, and Sharice Davids as leaders of the Equality Caucus, and so many others, many of whom are here today, who did what was right. Standing behind me are dozens of plaintiffs. Up there, don't jump. The dozens of plaintiffs who fought for marriage equality through the years, as well as families whose existence would not be possible without the bonds of love and this law honors and protects. Look, we're here today to celebrate their courage and everyone who made the day possible. Courage that led to progress we've seen over the decades, progress that gives us hope that every generation will continue our journey toward a more perfect union. On this day, I think of Mildred and Richard Loving, a young woman of color and a young white man. They met as family friends and eventually fell in love. In 1958, they drove to Washington, D.C. to get married because the relationship was illegal in Virginia. They went back home. 5 weeks later, police burst into their house and arrested them for the crime of being married, the crime of being married. They were sentenced to 1 year in prison unless they agreed to leave Virginia and not return for 25 years. They appealed the sentence, and wasn't took till 9 years later, in 1967, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled unanimously. It declared that laws against interracial marriage were unconstitutional. Today, we're joined by one of the lawyers who represented the Lovings and the widow of their other lawyer that took the fight to the highest court because they believed their love should not be criminalized, but should be honored and respected. As Mildred Loving said, previous generations were, quote, bitterly divided over something that should have been so clear and right. So clear and right. No one could put it better. And later, Mildred fought something else that's so clear and right. Marriage equality for LGBTQ Americans. And today, we celebrate our progress from Hawaii, the first state to declare that denying marriage of same-sex couples is unconstitutional, to Massachusetts, the first state to legalize marriage equality for couples like Gina and Heidi, who you just heard from. To all the advocates, excuse me, who worked to block or overturn state bans. As you heard earlier, Vice President Harris took a stand as Attorney General in California. Talked earlier. Others also spoke out. One of them was my son, Beau Biden, who was Attorney General of the state of Delaware, who filed an amicus brief with the Supreme Court in favor of marriage equality and pushed to add gender identity protections into the law as well. Today, remember Edie Windsor and her partner, Thea. In 1965, they met in their 30s. They fell in love, secretly got engaged, and Edie wore an engagement pin rather than a ring to avoid questions. They had 40 wonderful years together. Then Thea was diagnosed with MS, and Edie became her full-time caregiver. They went to Canada. They got married. As Edie would say, don't postpone joy. And then Thea died soon after, grieving Edie learned, since their marriage wasn't legally recognized, she would have to pay $360,000 in estate taxes. Viewed as strangers rather than partners for 4 decades. Simply unconscionable. and unacceptable. So Edie took her case to the Supreme Court and she won. Before Edie passed away, she fell in love again at age 87. Finally experienced the joy and dignity of legally recognized marriage to Judith. Judith is here today with us. Judith, are you up there? Also here today are many of the 16 plaintiffs in the same-sex marriage case that helped bring us here. They were subjected to intense public scrutiny and harassment, physical threats and violence for years as their cases made their way through the courts. Jim couldn't be here today, but he and I spoke on that day in June 2015 when he was on the steps of the United States Supreme Court. I called him right after that historic victory, a victory not just for the plaintiffs, but for the whole country, and I would argue for the world. My fellow Americans, the road to this moment has been long, but those who believe in equality and justice, you never gave up. Many of you standing on the South Lawn here. So many of you put your relationships on the line, your jobs on the line, your lives on the line to fight for the law I'm about to sign. For me and the entire nation, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's one thing for the Supreme Court to rule on a case, but it's another thing entirely if elected representatives of the people to take a vote on the floor of the United States Congress and say loudly and clearly, love is love, right is right, justice is justice. These things are fundamental things that America thinks matter. So sadly, we must also acknowledge another reason we're here. Congress is acting because an extreme Supreme Court has stripped away the right important to millions of Americans that existed for half a century. The Dobbs decision, the court's extreme conservative majority overturned Roe v. Wade and the right to choose. In his concurring opinion, Justice Thomas went even further, and he wrote the following, quote, "We should reconsider all the court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, Lawrence, Obergefell." That means he thinks we should reconsider whether you got the right to access to contraception. And yes, we should reconsider whether you have the right to marry who you love. And that's not only the challenge ahead. When a person can be married in the morning and thrown out of a restaurant for being gay in the afternoon, this is still wrong. Wrong. And that's why the people you heard speak today continue to fight to pass the Equality Act. When hospitals, libraries, and community centers are threatened and intimidated, excuse me, because they support LGBTQ children and families, we have to speak out. We must stop the hate and violence, like we just saw in Colorado Springs, where a place of acceptance and celebration was targeted for violence and terror. We need to challenge the hundreds of callous and cynical laws introduced in the states targeting transgender children, terrifying families, and criminalizing doctors who give children the care they need. We have to protect these children so they know they are loved, and we will stand up for them and say they can seek for themselves. Folks, racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia, they're all connected. But the antidote to hate is love. This law and the love it defends strike a blow against hate in all its forms. And that's why this law matters to every single American, no matter who you are or who you love. This shouldn't be about conservative or liberal, red or blue. No, this is about realizing the promise of the Declaration of Independence, a promise rooted in a sacred and secular beliefs, a promise that we're all created equal. We're all entitled to what Abraham Lincoln called an open field and a fair chance. You know, there's nothing more decent, more dignified, more American that we're about what we're doing here today. It's about who we are as a nation. It's about the substance of our laws. It's about being true to the best of the soul of America. Decency, dignity, love. Let me close with something else that happened on the same day that Congress sent me this bill. Brittany Griner was finally on her way home. I got to know her incredible wife as I worked to bring Brittany home from her unjust imprisonment in Russia. We were together in the Oval Office, her wife and I. We heard Brittany's voice on the phone when she was freed. And we addressed the nation together. When we did that, Brittany's wife said, quote, "Today, my family is whole. My fellow Americans, that all-consuming, life-altering, love and commitment, that's marriage. Thank you to everyone on the hard-fought victory generations in the making. It's been a long road, but we got it done. We're going to continue the work ahead, I promise you. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. And now, let me sign the Respect for Marriage Act into law."
President Biden on the South Lawn of the White House set to now sign the historic Respect for Marriage Act, the bipartisan bill that passed both the Senate and the House before being sent to President Biden. We know that 12 Republican senators, 39 Republicans in the House joining Democrats in making this happen. You heard the president talk about the work that still needs to be done, though he said this is a vital step toward equality across this country. He thanked House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who was emotional in recent days as this passed the House, one of her final acts as Speaker of the House.
Right, she was that day.
Here we go.
And there you have it. President Biden signing the Respect for Marriage Act there at the White House today. Our senior White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, watching along with me here. And Mary, the president chuckling a bit when he said 10 years ago, I got in a little bit of trouble. He was ahead of the curve on this issue and proud of it as he stood there today.
And what a moment today to really see this all come full circle for Joe Biden. It was 10 years ago that he did that interview, making very clear and very public his support for marriage equality. And he said then, as he did today, that marriage is a simple proposition. Who do you love? He said it is a decision that should be made without government interference. It is an issue of civil rights. And while it may seem hard to believe now, 10 years later, it was a very big deal. And it really paved the way and certainly nudged then President Obama to go ahead and make public his support for marriage equality. Joe Biden then doing what very few officials, certainly none at his level, were doing openly. And so now this is really more than just a moment about this bill. This is really a legacy moment for this president, able to cement now into law his support for marriage equality. And David, I have to tell you, I've never seen a bill signing quite like this. There are thousands of people out here simply celebrating love, because in requiring now that all states honor all marriages, this bill does away with a huge amount of fear, making way for love and respect, and that is certainly something that is being celebrated and partied here today.
Mary Bruce there at the White House. Mary, our thanks to you. The president there talking about, as Mary alluded to, that interview 10 years ago when he got out ahead of then President Obama on the issue of marriage equality. Of course, President Obama at the time then told our Robin Roberts that he obviously agreed with his vice president, regardless of whether or not the vice president at the time got out ahead of President Obama. I do want to bring in Terry Moran, who covers the Supreme Court. He has for many years for us. And Terry, as we know, this bill happened today in large part over concern after the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, and that concurring opinion from Justice Clarence Thomas indicating that he believes that the approval of same-sex marriage under the court should be looked at again at some point. They were hoping to defend against that by moving forward with what they did here today.
Exactly, David. Right now, Americans have a constitutional right to same-sex marriage. But because of that Justice Thomas concurring opinion, joined by none of the other justices, but where he said the same legal reasoning that justified Roe versus Wade was used to justify gay marriage. And he said maybe it should be reconsidered. So this is a big deal, because what this law will do is step in if the court ever overturns the case that guaranteed a constitutional right to same-sex marriage. And it does a few things. It requires the federal government and the states to recognize and to legally honor all marriages performed in the United States under state law, regardless of sex or race or national origin or ethnicity. It doesn't require states, if gay marriage is overturned, to have laws guaranteeing rights in those states to gay marriage, but it does protect the marriages that are legal elsewhere. So if you're legally married in California or New York, you're married across the country. It also does provide protections for religious groups who have moral objections to gay marriage. They won't be required to provide goods or services or lose their tax-exempt status. So as President Biden likes to say, it's a big deal. It would protect those marriages, all the families, all the people that we know in our lives who are married under the Supreme Court's establishment of a constitutional right to gay marriage will remain married if the court ever backtracks, as we now know it can, and takes that right away.
Terry Moran offering the context from the Supreme Court, as he always does. Let's look live here at these pictures from the South Lawn of the White House. President Biden surrounded by supporters of this moment. Just a short time ago, signing the landmark bipartisan bill protecting same-sex and interracial marriages in the United States. Our coverage continues on ABC News Live, abcnews.com, and of course, I'll be back with the entire team just a short time from now for ABC's World News Tonight. I'm David Muir in New York. Until then, good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
And thanks, David. I'm Kira Phillips. Let's continue to watch those live pictures from the White House if we can. The President of the United States in that historic signing you saw right there at the table, signing that landmark bipartisan bill protecting same-sex and interracial marriages. The historic Respect for Marriage Act requires the federal government to recognize those marriages. And now you heard the president just moments ago saying this law is honoring and respecting love, marriage, and everyone's right to marry. Straight to our Terry Moran outside the Supreme Court, something you have been following for a long time, Terry, even more so after Roe versus Wade was overturned. And we heard those hints from Clarence Thomas that marriage equality could be the next in line, that it could be bad news for the LGBTQ community. Today, it's a new day.
It is a new day, Kira, no question, because since that case, the Obergefell case, which the Supreme Court established and discovered a right to marry the person you love, regardless of whether you're gay or straight, there have been millions and millions of people married. All these families across the United States, all of us know people who are married under the Supreme Court's recognition of a right to marry. If the Supreme Court ever takes that right away, as we now know they can after the overturning of Roe versus Wade, what this law does is protect those families and marriages. It requires the federal government and all of the states to legally recognize and honor marriages that were performed during the time that gay marriage would have been legal if the Supreme Court overturns it, and marriages that would be performed in states which would have laws that recognize gay marriage. It does not require all the states to have such laws in the event that gay marriage is overturned by the Supreme Court. But if you're married in one place, you'd be married everywhere. In other words, if you're married in California, every state would have to recognize the legality of that marriage. And finally, it does provide, this law, protections for religious groups that have moral objections to gay marriage. They would not be required under law to provide goods or services in those instances or their churches or places of worship, and they wouldn't lose tax-exempt status. But really what this does is protect all of those couples and all of those families in our country that are married and are our neighbors and people, our colleagues and all the rest, to protects them from the uncertainty and the chaos that would result if the Supreme Court ever overturns the gay marriage ruling and plunges them into legal limbo. Right now, because of this law that President Biden just signed, their marriages will remain intact, respected, honored, and legal no matter what.
Showing that no American should have to worry about losing the freedom to marry the person they love. Terry Moran there outside the Supreme Court. Thank you so much. Straight back to that event as we watch live pictures. Our Mary Bruce right there in the middle of it all. Mary, I even heard you say you have never seen an event quite like this. It is definitely a historic moment for those there. But it's interesting, the president singing a different tune from the 90s, back when he as a senator voted to block federal recognition of same-sex marriages. Why the change of heart?
Well, look, I think for Joe Biden, like so many politicians, this really has been an issue with a lot of evolution. But today is really a moment of all of that coming full circle for Joe Biden. This is about a lot more than just this one bill, this one law. This is about Joe Biden's legacy as well. You know, we were talking about how it was 10 years ago. I'm sure you remember well when Joe Biden did that television interview. He was then vice president, and he came out and made very public his support for marriage equality. He said at the time, as he did today, that marriage is a simple proposition. Who do you love? And he says that is just as true today as it was then. And it may be hard to imagine, but that was a very big deal at the time. And in going public with that, he nudged essentially the then president, Barack Obama, to come out, do an interview with our Robin Roberts, and make clear also his support for marriage equality. It really was a watershed moment in this country. So for Joe Biden today to be able to cement really his support for marriage equality into law is a very big deal indeed. And I have to tell you, he's doing it with quite a lot of excitement. I have never, as I said, seen a bill signing like this. This isn't normally how it is here out on the South Lawn of the White House. There are thousands of people here, advocates, survivors of hate-fueled violence. We are seeing many of the plaintiffs involved in these cases who are here as well. And it simply is a huge celebration of love, because in this bill, in now requiring all states to honor all marriages, it really does do away with so much fear that I think has been, that we have felt in this country. And it makes room for a lot of love, a lot of respect, and that is what is being celebrated here today. You can feel it. I think the president, he's still up there, I think, shaking hands. Knowing Joe Biden, he may be here quite a while, Kira, so the party goes on.
Yes, it does. And again, you know, you see the colors of the flag, the rainbow flag there behind you across the White House. I remember the days of Obama, Mary. That was the first time we saw the same lights across the White House when Obama told us all that gay marriage would be legalized. And it was such a historic day across the country and here while we covered the White House at that time. So, Mary, any idea who's going to get the pen? You know, after every bill signing, he hands the pen to someone. He's gonna have a lot of people fighting for that pen today.
That is a very good point. You know, often he signs like one letter with each letter with a different pen so that he can give them out. There's certainly a lot of people who would like to get their hands on that, but most people are just happy to be here, happy to experience this historic moment. And, you know, we should note that, yes, while this is a huge moment in our nation's history, there is still a lot more work to be done. There is still very much a concern about what a conservative court could do on this issue. So, yes, a moment to celebrate, but the work does continue. And I suspect maybe some folks up there shaking the president's hands are asking for one of those pens too, Kira.
And clearly the party will continue. Our Mary Bruce, Chief White House Correspondent. Mary, thank you so much. All right, let's take it now to Kimberly Whaley, a constitutional law expert. You know, Kimberly, the bill did pass with bipartisan support. However, we have pointed out it also has protections for religious liberty. So when you look at what happened today, symbolic measure, legally a big deal?
Honestly, I don't think legally it's such a big deal. It's more symbolic, and this is why. The way the law works is the Constitution's at the very top, right? And so the Supreme Court so far has said the Constitution protects the right to marry whoever you want. No state can limit that. With Dobbs, took that away for abortion rights. What this bill says is if the Supreme Court reverses that, and says in the future, states can stop allowing gay couples to marry. If you're already married, they can't take that away from you. So it's a little nuanced legally. Arguably, that was already protected by a part of the Constitution called the Full Faith and Credit Clause. What it does is reverse or repeal the Defense of Marriage Act. It's kind of amazing. 26 years ago, in 1996, the United States Congress did the exact opposite, and Bill Clinton signed it into law and said the federal government's not going to recognize gay marriage. The federal government, the Congress, is not going to require states to recognize each other's marriages. The Supreme Court struck down two important pieces of that, so that's kind of been repealed by the Supreme Court. So it's a little bit technical here. I do think it's extremely important to send a strong message to the Supreme Court and to the country that the other branches of government, the United States Congress, bipartisan, and the president is not on board with stripping people of their constitutional rights. And I would hope to see in my lifetime, frankly, a similar gesture for people who become pregnant and want to have reproductive choice stay with them and their families and their religious leaders and their doctors, and not have politicians dictate whether people have to have forced pregnancies. But symbolically, again, I agree this is really important, and it gives people the idea in their heads that there should be protections for these foundational sort of private decisions around how to live your life in marriage and in procreation, frankly, moving forward.
Kimberly, thank you. Great perspective, insight. Let's take it to the Hill. Our Jay O'Brien has been following this as well, getting reaction from there. You know, Democrats worked so hard to pass this legislation, Jay, before January. They feel they needed to get it done before the end of the year.
Yeah, it was a priority of Speaker Pelosi's to get it done, as you said, before the end of the year. You heard Speaker Pelosi talking about the history of this moment, both when the bill passed its last stop in the House before heading to the president's desk, but also today when she spoke at this event. You heard the president thank lawmakers who were so integral to getting this deal done. Tammy Baldwin, the senator from Wisconsin, the first openly gay U.S. senator, a Democrat, who got in a room with Susan Collins of Maine and lawmakers of both sides of the aisle and struck this deal to make sure that the legislation passed the Senate. And as you're seeing there, it got 12 Senate Republicans to vote for it. They needed 10. They got 12. Mitt Romney being one of the most notable people who said he would throw his support behind this bill before that vote came up in the Senate. You heard the president thank them for that. You're also seeing the White House try to set this bill signing in the larger arc of history for marriage equality. And you heard lawmakers talking about it as well as this bill kept coming up for a vote, that this is part of a decades-long fight for marriage equality, both for same-sex couples and for interracial couples. Just to underscore that, President Biden talked about the Loving versus Virginia case, the case in the Supreme Court, 1967, that gave the right to interracial marriage. One of those two cases, the other being Obergefell v. Hodges, that gave those key marriage equality rights that led to the creation of this law out of concern that those cases would be overturned. Again, Loving versus Virginia gets decided in 1967. That's 55 years ago. There are U.S. senators who voted for this legislation who are older than 55, who were alive when this case was decided. So there was a larger arc of history here, and the White House trying to set this key historic bill signing today as a seminal moment in that arc for marriage equality.
So with all that put into perspective, Kimberly, let me ask you, is it said and done, or can the court take another look at this?
Listen, in the Dobbs decision, the court established really a new two-part test for deciding if there are constitutional rights in the United States Constitution. Number one, is it in black and white? And there's nothing in the Constitution protecting the ability to choose who you want to marry, whatever color, whatever LGBTQ status. Marriage itself is not expressed in the Constitution. Step two under Dobbs is if it's not expressed in the Constitution, then you get in your time machine and you go back to the past. And in Dobbs, the court went back to common law England even before the Constitution was ratified. So we don't really know how far back Justices Alito and others would be comfortable going. But you get in your time machine, you go back and you say, was the right recognized way, way back back then. And if it wasn't recognized back then, it's not recognized today. So that's why so many constitutional rights, not just abortion, are in a precarious position right now, because the court could apply that two-part test to all kinds of things. The ability to decide on your own health care, the ability to decide where your child goes to school, the ability to enter into a contract. In theory, a state could say only these people can enter into these kinds of contracts. All of this Constitution is really old and it's really vague, and so there have been rights that have been read into it that just are conform with our idea of liberty. Joe Biden talked about this idea of love and freedom, these democratic values, these American values. They're not in black and white. But if this conservative court is just going to go by the book, if it's not in black and white, then we go history, we go decades, centuries back. We're really going the other direction. So again, symbolically, to say to this Supreme Court, Justice Thomas in particular, the other two branches, including Republicans in the United States Congress, are not down for this reversal of constitutional rights in America. So you better be aware we're not on board with that. I think that's really, really important, because the Supreme Court is a little bit kind of sort of drunk with their own power, frankly, in this moment. They're being very, very aggressive in how they're rereading the Constitution. They're not elected. So bringing these issues back to the people, I think, is absolutely vital for the protections of our freedoms moving forward.
Well, I'll tell you what, you bring up old, vague, black and white. When you look at the White House today, you saw the rainbow colors across the White House, the most important house in the land right now. And that is going to be a big fight going up against old and vague, that's for sure. More to come, more to cover. Kim, Jay, thank you both so much. Keep it right here on ABC News Live. We have much more right after the break.